Hello and welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to confidence in starting and growing your business. My guest this week is David Liddle. David is the founder of the TCM Group, a global consultancy specialising in mediation, conflict resolution and people-centred leadership. Now, I've known him on and off for years, and I'm delighted to see how he's risen to become #1 HR most influential thinker, #1 consultant of the year, and the president of the People and Culture Institute. David's journey, though, as you'll hear, has had plenty of bumps along the way, and he's disarmingly honest about them in this interview, so do strap yourself in for an incredible journey in this episode. Let's go back to those early years and to a period where some of the hardest human problems were already teaching him lessons that would stay with him for life.
Wow, yeah, it's I look back with real fondness at that period in time, and I learned so much, Trevor. Learned so much about people, culture, relationships, how we live together, work together, how we sense a sense of belonging. I also learned a lot about the concept of justice and what does justice mean to people, both in terms of the felt experience of justice and receiving justice. So my work back in the sort of early 90s, I did a degree in race and community relations, and I was working with some really tough communities in inner city Leicester at the time. And it really kind of showed me and identified for me how deep-rooted conflict is within communities, within families and across neighbourhoods, and also showed me really the importance of a sense of fairness and belonging, if you like, as part of being together in a society, in a community, and also how woefully inadequate the service provision was in our communities for dispute resolution and conflict management, from ignoring it and really not tackling it, through to blue lights, sirens wailing, and really kind of often very escalatory approaches. Felt there was very little being done in the middle. And I remember my manager, when I first started in the work, and he said to me, "David, I love your ideas, but they're a bit naive." I've been called naive a few times on the journey, Trevor. He said to me, "You're a bit naive, David, because the people here, as much as you might think dialogue and mediation might work, they don't," this is quote unquote, "they don't have the capacity to resolve issues themselves." And what I observed is when we create spaces, powerful moments for people to come together and engage in dialogue and giving dialogue primacy, what I'm meaning by that is getting people and giving people the opportunity to talk and to listen, to learn and understand. What I learned from my work in really very, very conflict-ridden communities is even when things were really tough, and I'm talking really tough, when we give people the opportunity to come together in that space, they can move mountains. And that the insight and the learning and the opportunity to hold those difficult conversations with people had deep-rooted grievances that sometimes were generational. They went back sometimes years, many, many years. And what it told me is that when we create those spaces, and then subsequently the systems and the processes around this, it doesn't just help the individuals resolve issues, it builds stronger, more sustainable relationships.
Okay, so there you are, young guy making your way in the world, maybe in the words of others, being a bit naive. Did you, when they told you things like that, did you carry on being naive and quite happily being naive, or did you say, "Oh yes, actually, I'm being a bit naive there, and I'll try it your way"? I mean, were you a bit of a rebel with your naivety to go along with it?
No, I don't think I was a rebel at all. I think they were naive. I think they were naive in believing that focusing on the tough issues of antisocial behaviour and rent arrears or void properties or heavy-handed policing tactics or heavy-handed community relations tactics would in some way build integrated, safe, harmonious communities. So I flipped it in my head. I saw what I was doing. It was deeply human, deeply connected, was deeply relational. It's what people were desperate for. And my experience of my work ever since is people are desperate to be heard. People are desperate to be understood. People are desperate to be valued. People are desperate to be appreciated. And I was dealing with people who are experiencing significant poverty in many, many different forms, but those needs were there. So I did not see myself as naive, nor do I see myself as naive, nor idealistic. I saw those other approaches of heavy-handed, sanctions-based, adversarial, punitive avoidance as being deeply naive and deeply lacking understanding of what human beings need when they work together, live together, and and have communities where we integrate with one another. So I felt very strongly. I guess that came with a young sort of sense of passion and idealism. But no, I didn't see myself as naive at any time, Trevor. No, nor have I ever done so. Although I've been told I am many times. I use that as a badge of honor.
Okay, well, that's excellent. I mean, was there a moment then, that these ideas, that you were having, where you were feeling very passionate, and that comes across strongly already.
Mm.
That the ideas, did they, where you thought, well, actually, my ideas are sort of outgrowing the organisations that I'm working with and for, and was it at that moment where you started to think, well, I want to go and do my own thing? I'm just interested in
Yeah.
how the thought process went.
Yeah, it was a really great question. So bearing in mind, so my early work was in neighbourhood dispute mediation and started with nothing. I was the first person in the UK, one of the first people in the UK to set up mediation and restorative justice program there, early 90s. I went to work in schools, working with teaching techniques and building empathy and compassion into student-centred teaching practices. I was working in the criminal justice system, in victim offender mediation and restorative practices. And what I realized is I'm developing a set of skills and capabilities which I think are really powerful and useful and really very, very important, with a sense of urgency within our workplaces. So I actually went to do an MBA. I was running a charity. I loved it. I loved working with the volunteers. And as well as my skills in restorative practice and mediation, I also realized running a charity, I was learning about HR, about finance, about marketing, organizational development. So all of the things that I was learning about in my MBA, which I was the other aspect of the MBA, not having been an entirely academic student, Trevor, maybe I was a little disruptive in my schooling days as much as I was in my work days. I didn't really experience the joy of learning until my master's. And so I was realized, A, I'm quite good at what I do, and B, I just loved the learning. So I got a distinction in my MBA studying restorative practice in two large London boroughs, at Croydon and at Hounslow, and in the Cabinet Office. And my eyes, the sort of scales fell from my eyes really in those MBA classes as I was learning about Toyota and Japanese management systems and TQM and accounting and finance, and just loving every part of that. That's when I realized, hang on, I've got something here which I think would work in the world of work. And I formed my company at the back of a workshop one evening at De Montfort University on my MBA class.
So there was a particular moment then when
Yes.
you actually thought, when you were sitting there that evening, just kind of, workshopping it to death, just to sort of, just to get, just to understand what you were doing. Was there a moment within that where, a sort of scales falling after the scales fell, where you just thought, actually, I'm going to do this. I'm not just going to write this down. I am actually going to do this.
It was, and it came from a conflict, actually. Being someone who works in conflict and always has, it came because of conflict. And of course, for many people, their careers developed because of conflict. So I set up a local program called CRISP, the Conflict Resolution in Schools program. We had a BBC documentary made about it, and it was funded by the National Lottery as well. So I went back to the National Lottery and said, can I have £500,000 to fund the Conflict Resolution in Schools program on a national basis and franchising it across the country? And the National Lotteries didn't do continuation funding for projects. They just funded one off and obviously expected you to then carry it forward. So I was the first project. They said, yes, we'll give you £500,000 continuation funding to grow CRISP nationally. But by this point, my entrepreneurial approach was starting to rub against some of the board in my charity, and they decided that clipping my wings at this moment was the right thing to do. They looked at our constitution, which said Leicester and its environs, we're going to reject the £500,000 that you've worked tirelessly to get from the National Lottery. So I was doing my MBA, and I also had worked tirelessly on securing a £500,000 bid, which my charity trustees, for reasons which I still don't understand, said now isn't the time for us to be expanding on a national basis. So they asked me or instructed me to go to the lottery and turn that funding down. What I did, Trevor, is that coupled with my MBA and the sort of sense that there's more going on here, and the fact that I had this significant strategic disagreement with my charity, my trustees, I decided time was to move on. So those things collided in around about 2000, give or take, around that period, just at the tail end of 2000. And I decided now was the time for me to set up my own business. So that was it all, it sort of coincided, but it didn't feel coincidental at the time. It felt chaotic. But looking back, I can see there were patterns forming.
Okay, all right. So we often can't see the patterns that are obvious to those around us. But in the end, in 2001, you founded the TCM group, and now that's grown into a sort of global consultancy. I mean,
Yeah.
I want take me back to day one. Did you have offices then, or were you just sort of literally just sitting there with a laptop and thinking, "What do I do now?"
I love that. It's a very fond memory. So my wife loved London, and we loved going to London. I loved being in London. I could go to London and visit and come back home again. And my wife said to me, "Look, this is a good opportunity for us to move to London." And I thought, "I know, not the London conversation again." So he said, "Well, if you apply for some jobs, and we'll see what happens." And of course, lo and behold, the first job my lovely wife Jane applies for at the Homerton Hospital in Hackney, she's successful in. So she's like, "Right, that's it. We're off to London." So I'm setting up the business in Leicester. I'm finishing my MBA. I'm doing some work in Hillingdon and Croydon councils around dignity at work and fair treatment practices. I'm working into the Cabinet Office. So I've got some contracts now starting to generate some revenue. And then lo and behold, we moved to London very, very rapidly and moved down to London. And I began working in a small office at King's Cross, very dusty old office. It was one of those that was the best I could afford at the time. And a friend of mine whose dad ran an advertising agency in Clerkenwell came in, and we went out for lunch. He said, "This is not good for you, David. I've got a basement in St John Street in Clerkenwell. If you can come in and clear it out under this advertising agency, you can have it." So I set up my own little office in this basement. I became a member of the Institute of Directors, so I could go and see clients at the IOD and kind of give the appearance of being something bigger than I was, and then set out to have these conversations with organisations. And what came back to me, Trevor, I would go out and asking human resources professionals and managers and others, how can I help you? I'm a mediator. I help bring people together. And the phone started ringing off the hook. I did not realise, and I don't think I probably fully understood, how challenging conflict was in our workplaces. And you might remember when I introduced the work I did in the community, I talked about the woefully inadequate response of the agencies for conflict. It was woefully inadequate, the response to conflict in our organisations. And suddenly here I am, a mediator with some skills and strengths around facilitation, negotiation, dialogue, engagement, learning and growth, and the things that are so powerful to build strong, effective teams, that the phone started to ring. And suddenly I recognised that mediation wasn't just a nice to have, or something that was perhaps a bit of a side hustle. It was absolutely critical in terms of resolving some of these issues.
Okay, so at that moment in time, that was a while ago now.
Yeah.
Were people aware that there was, that they had a problem in their business that needed resolving, or were they not even aware that they had a problem until it was too late and the thing had exploded in their faces?
Exactly that. They didn't aware that there was the problem. They weren't aware that they needed a solution. If there was a solution, it was sat in some procedure, a grievance procedure, or so on and so forth. They'd never heard of this thing called medication or meditation, or is it mediation? They were really confused. They didn't have, and if they did have a problem, they denied they had a problem because it was a sign of failure. So managers hid conflict. HR professionals tried to reject the concept of conflict. It was left too late. It was really transactional. It was really reactive. And I used to have a Hessian bag stuck over my head when I went into the basement of these organizations because they were so embarrassed. Don't mention we've got a mediator in the business. But what happened, and this is why it was so profound, is all of those other systems systematically failed to resolve the issue at source. They were a mirage of justice, an illusion of fairness. The processes gave the impression that everyone's busy. What the reality was, managers didn't have the skills to address issues. They avoided dealing with them. When we couldn't avoid them anymore, there was an expensive overreaction in litigation, in the tribunals, through formal grievances, people off sick, people unhappy, people unhealthy. And I was going into these basements. And if you bear in mind, people were not really minded to invest money in conflict resolution, or someone like myself. So I was only getting the really, 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 really difficult cases, the ones where everyone had tried. And then within a day of mediating, and working with these individuals, they were coming out with an agreement, an action plan, some kind of charter, some behavioral framework, some shift in the way that they worked. And I remember working for a major airline at Heathrow, going out of Heathrow, and I've done some work with various people in the airline. And the general manager literally summoned me to his office and said, "What are you putting in their coffee?" And I explained what I was doing to the general manager, and what the general manager and the HR director was in the office at Heathrow at the airline. And he turned around and said, "I want that across my whole business." And that put me into American Airlines and started working with an American. And so I started to work in the aviation sector. I started to work in banking, in pharma. I was working with BT, the fantastic Caroline Waters at BT, who brought me in there. I was working at Marks and Spencer's. I was working in big government departments. And suddenly this strange thing called mediation started to take hold. And I'll stop there because that's very early days. I can talk you through how that moved forward, but these profoundly impactful days.
Don't worry, David, we'll get on to that. But in those very early days where you're wheeled in to an organization because something's gone pear-shaped. I mean, did they and this is before the idea had taken hold. I mean, I'm interested in did they regard you as some sort of peace and love beatnik kind of guy who was coming in because actually businesses were quite tough places and this was no place for this fancy dispute resolution malarkey?
It's a really interesting question. It goes back to my point about being naive.
Yeah.
I felt I was an absolute realist. Because I was an objective, impartial third party, I could say things, Trevor, to the parties and challenge them in a way because I had no axe to grind. I was impartial. So my objectivity was an incredibly powerful tool that I brought to the conversation. So I was able to ask this really important question. Why do you do that? And what impact does that have on you? What impact does it have on the other person? What impact does it have on the situation? And by asking these questions, what's the impact? What's the intention behind the impact? Why do you do that? We can then start to say, that's our current state. This is where we are. And what I didn't do, Trevor, is I didn't get a big corporate finger and start wagging it. And I didn't engage in corporate tutting or tutting, mass tutting exercises, as I like to call them in our organizations. I didn't get involved in much hand wringing, as I recall. I didn't get involved in applying processes which were adversarial and broken. I started to connect with people as human beings. So to an extent, they may have thought that when they first started to work with me. But I people would say to me, what the heck is it that you do? What are you doing? So I'd have HR directors sat by my side. I was started to train mediators and starting to give people the skills. And I'd go into a mediation process and they go, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're saying what you're saying." I would never dare to say that. And so when I started to push back, what I was saying is your processes and your fear of challenge and your fear of conflict are the reasons that you're having me in. The things I'm doing, I don't have special dispensation. I'm good at it and I'm passionate about it. But I don't have special dispensation to ask that question, to challenge, to reflect back, to listen, to be curious, to connect with people on a human level. You're not doing it because you've built a hierarchy and a bureaucracy in your organization, which has removed the ability for you as an HR leader or a people leader or a manager to engage with people as human beings. And then you're bringing me in as an afterthought. And this is where I started to become frustrated, Trevor. I feel my life some of my big life changes have been born out of frustration. And one of the frustrations that I had was that I started to see myself as the corporate band-aid. I started to perceive that these skills and attributes that I bought were coming in at the end of a broken system when everything had started to unravel and we're seeing real trauma and harm. And I'm thinking to myself, why are you doing this to your people? And then having me coming in and being a bit embarrassed about me coming in and anxious about me coming in, when all I'm doing is helping people have a very human connection with each other. Why is it as an HR leader and as an executive and a business manager, have you created an architecture around your organization which limits the most powerful tools that you need to have within your organization, which is the ability to listen, to engage, to understand, to draw insight and creativity? And surely, I said to myself, surely, as leaders and as HR professionals, isn't that your job? Isn't that what you're supposed to be doing? Are you not subcontracting your responsibilities to me And after 10 years of mediating, I'd had enough of it. I was starting to think to myself, I'm not helping now. Now we've got to change the system. Now we've got to change the culture. Now we need to start to really rethink the whole rules-based system at work. And that takes me to about 2013.
Okay, so let's put a little bookmark in 2013. I'm interested. At the same time, there's like twin tracks going on, because a lot of people who set up their own businesses, they're passionate about the subject, and it comes across very clearly that you were passionate, albeit becoming a little bit disillusioned with the point at which you're brought in. Let's go on to, David, the entrepreneur, if you like.
Yeah, of course.
How were you dealing with challenges on the business at the time? Did you feel like you had a clear vision of where you were going, or was it something that was a kind of, administrative inconvenience, that was taking up time? I'm interested in how your view of running a business evolved over that time, and what did it get tough at points? What were the challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, really, really great. I mean, it's, one looks back and sees the trials and tribulations of running a business. And of course, they are learning points as well. But so through the periods from setting up in 2001, so I incorporated in June 2001, and I talked about some of the big corporate clients that I was working with, but actually they came latterly. The early adopters of mediation and restorative practice tend to be the public sector. You might get a sense of where this is going. So 2001 to 2008, my business just grew off the scale. There is a lot of money to be made being the corporate band-aid, Trevor. There's no question. People are willing to throw a bit of money when the yogurt's hitting the fan, and I was there when the yogurt was spraying around the room and then some. So they weren't willing to spend a lot, nowhere near as much as they'd spend on a junior partner from an employment law firm. But don't get me started about the value of dialogue over litigation systems. But I was taking some of that revenue. 2008, we all know what happens. We start to see the financial crisis. Now, that doesn't actually ricochet through to the public sector spending until around about April 2011. March 2011, there seems to be lots of cash in the system. I'm like, oh, this is fun. We're doing well. I've got a big team of full-time consultants. I've got lovely offices in Hatton Garden by this time. So I've moved out of my friend's basement offices. I'm in Hatton Garden. I've got a mediation centre, a training centre. I've got offices. I've got a full-time team. I'm carrying a big overhead. You can see the direction this is going to hit. April 2011, I've had a great March. April stops. May stops, June stops. By the time I've got through the summer and into October, we've run out of money, and the public sector have stopped spending money. So it's at that point that we start to see a significant impact on the business, with all of the challenges that I'm sure many listeners will have had if they've had experienced the same. Running out of money is basically the lifeblood of the business is diminished. People still owed me money. So there was some assets there that I could draw upon, but we were in a bad place. I won't go into all the details, but it was difficult. We nearly went under twice in that period. I think I'm a pretty stubborn person for a mediator. I'm patient and stubborn. So I'm not going to let this go. But I did need to downsize and right size. Went through some really tough times in that period. And what I did realize is my exposure to the public sector was just too great. And really, I talked about the BT and the Marks and Spencers and Arcadia Group, who are no longer with us. And I know Arcadia had mixed views on Arcadia, but I loved working with Arcadia, Topshop, Topman, BHS.
Did you ever consider packing it in at that point? Because a lot of people do. Yeah.
Once. I had an insolvency lawyer in, and I did only once in the whole time I've run the business over 25 years. And I had the insolvency lawyer in, and he said, David, don't you worry. You're in safe hands. We'll set up a Phoenix company and you can walk away from all of this and you'll still be successful. And I'll take what assets you've got, which obviously with a lot of that was money that was owing to me. But I kind of saw a little glint of glee in his eye, and I saw him rubbing his hands together. I thought, why is he rubbing it? Why is it in my business that feels to me like it's in stress and distress, and it feels distressed, and it is distressed? What's he seeing? Why is he rubbing his hands together? And I'm not seeing something. So in that moment, I met with him because I was considering winding the business up. I was like, no, you've seen something. I've got assets and I'm just not touching those assets. One of them was money that was owed to me. I had the building, I had the reputation, I had the brand, I had the knowledge, I had the skills. And so I said to myself in that moment, no way am I letting this happen. What I need to do is grow up. Maybe if I was not, if you threw the label of naivety at me, and it's a reasonable challenge, maybe I was just a wee bit naive then, thinking that passion and that drive would get me all the way through. What I needed to build in my business was strong systems, strong infrastructure, good data, good insight, taking my entrepreneurial zeal for the passion for the project and building that into the way that I ran my own company. So what I started to do was started to look inward at my own company and started to take all the learning. I'd mediated between accountants, heads of finance, chief business, all of the senior roles. So I thought, well, what have I learned from all of these people? System, structure, strategy, data, knowledge, insight, management, leadership. And I realized that the cobbler's kids did have the worst shoes in the village and I needed to go and get them repaired, which is exactly what I did. So once in my entire quarter of a century, did I contemplate it, and it didn't last long.
Okay, so it came through it, perhaps that stubborn streak that you were talking about, and then we moved on to a sort of much kind of happier period, if you like, of expansion, more private sector work, and so on.
Correct.
What was, I mean, it's one thing to resolve disputes, be a
Mm,
mediator, and things like that, but I've kind of known you on and off for a period of time. And one thing for me that stands out about you is that you seem to have this fusion of passion about what you do, but also I feel like the language you use is very businessy,
mm.
for want of a better term. Because it's I feel like sometimes people will have the passion, but they won't have the kind of seeing it, from a more business perspective. Is that what you think marks you out, or is it something else, or?
I hope so. I mean, it's very sadly, my mum died just before Christmas. My mum was an entrepreneur. She was in nursing, and then she moved into residential care through the sort of 80s and 90s. So whilst mum was very poorly in the hospice, it did give us really nice opportunities to reflect. So I'm just going to sort of give a nod to,
Sure.
to my
Okay.
mum, if I
Yeah.
may, because I think I get that from her. She was a nurse, so she cared about people, very compassionate. My dad's a nurse as well. And mum in particular had that entrepreneurial streak, very resilient in the 1980s, high interest rates, tough to set up businesses. And she went into it. And I think I'm going to give a nod to my mum that I'd like to think I bring that compassionate, people-centered approach into the work. And I don't like to think, I do that. And that's part of the modus operandi of the TCM group, is what purpose-driven, people-centered, values-based work. But there is also an entrepreneurial side of it. And I don't always know my own value. I sometimes go and do talks for nothing and do things. And I think we all do that. But I think I know the value of what I'm doing in for organizations. And I think I've realized that there has to be a commercial engine behind the passion. Otherwise, it's purely passion and it will run out of steam. I don't know if it sets me apart, but it certainly means that I've got a senior leadership team who are very, very senior leadership team who are excellent. I have client success managers. I have an infrastructure. I have the top tech, Salesforce, Marketing Cloud. I have all the top tech in the business. So I'm able to afford to run a very successful corporate engine. And the corporate engine is a symbiotic relationship with my passion. I can't be passionate if I don't have the engine behind me to fund and fuel that. But also my passion then feeds into the corporate engine and vice versa. So I see a real connection between passion and purpose and profit. And I'm a huge fan of profit. I believe as a business, whilst I'm very, again, sort of socially minded and social value and social justice minded, I also believe that I'm making a big contribution to the economy. I employ people, I pay my taxes. I do a very important piece of work in terms of social value, social justice, and also economic growth and performance. And I've got to be honest with you, Trevor, I even saying it gives me a sense of deep pride in contributing to this country and to what we do through the work that I do. And that's what gets me out of bed. And I don't think the passion for just the work of being a mediator, or subsequently now culture change, and the amazing work that we do is enough. It has to be all of it all at the same time, but without it becoming overwhelming. And I don't know if I've explained that clearly, but there needs to be like, there has to be a commercial engine. Otherwise it's just ideas and words, really.
Okay, so let's look at that growth versus
Mm.
the commercial side of things versus culture. I think you've warned that when businesses grow quickly, sometimes they can lose something along the way. And that thing is often the culture or the thing that
Yeah.
perhaps attracted people to the business, attracted customers to the business. Why? Why does that happen? Why do people not realize that the thing that made them good or different in some ways, is probably the most valuable thing that they have? Why does that happen?
It's almost like it's an interesting situation, because not only do we see that the people in the business, it goes from actually they're the most important asset, we now start to perceive them as a risk. And there becomes a really interesting tipping point in organizations where people, I don't like the term asset because we depreciate assets on the balance sheet to zero. So I'm not quite sure. So I work with organizations who see people maybe as assets. I sometimes think they see them as resources. The word human resources. I mean, what kind of message does that send out to our people? You're not a resource, you're a human being. Or utilitarian application of the way we think about people in our workplaces. But when we're setting out in business and the entrepreneur and the founder-led startup business is working with their people, they don't see them as utilities, as assets or resources. They see them as human beings helping to support the growth of their organization. And there's a tipping point. And one of the tipping points that I see is this message that's whispered in the entrepreneur's ear that you now need systems and processes. And they go, okay, well, let me go onto Google and find an HR person and a lawyer and an accountant. And we go and get these sort of classic professional services support. And that professional services support takes us some of the way. But that professional services support whispers the wrong thing in the ear, particularly from the HR function. What you need now is to protect yourself from an adverse outcome in a tribunal because your people are a risk. So we need to put in place an employee handbook and some processes. And that tipping point marks the downward spiral of a great many organizations. And the whispering in the ear of the entrepreneur by the HR consultant is singly, for me, the biggest fail point for most of our organizations. And what we need to be seeing in organizations isn't seeing our people as a risk and starting to grow our business with risk mitigation from our people, but recognizing so powerfully that people are the business. And our business is shaped by our culture, and leaders define the culture of our organization, and ultimately culture drives performance. And there's some really important words in that statement I've made: people, culture, leadership, behaviors, performance. And the effective leader moving forward through scale up and growth and hyper growth. And when I was writing my book, I interviewed one CPO who was in hyper growth. They create flow between those different elements. They don't create risk mitigation systems and HR processes. So for many organizations, the successful organizations, they listen to the words whispered in their ear and they reject them. They reject retribution. They reject blame. They reject adversarial, punitive, sanction-based, corrosive, infantilizing adversarial processes which are whispered in their ear. You must have these processes. And they reject them. And they say, I need to create flow in the system which connects people, purpose, values, behaviors, and outcomes where the processes of our workplace enable and facilitate those systems to work effectively and to optimize those. And those effective entrepreneurs and leaders listen to their gut, and they understand what it means to connect with people at a very deep level. And one of the big messages I'm taking to organizations through growth and startup and scale up, and also big organizations who are already in these places, is to reject the paradigms, the tired paradigms of 1990s working models, unitarist models of employer versus employee, and recognize we've moved beyond that. We've moved through pluralism, we've moved through postmodernism. We're in this amazing period of transformationalism, yet the systems of work still treat people as a utility, an asset, or a resource. And the language is embedded in our workplaces. Even the name human resources, which is for me is a pejorative and undermines the very essence of good working practices. It's people, culture, and leadership. That's the focus.
Okay, and you very skillfully mentioned your book, which is fantastic. You're obviously well trained on the media front. That's fantastic. Well done. So the book is People and Culture. So you've got these 5 domains: people, culture, strategy, justice, value. What do people need to understand about things? They could say, I kind of, of course those things are important.
Yeah.
But what is the power of them? Is it them in their own right, or the way they interact with one another? I mean, what is I suppose I'm asking why those five things? Because you could use other words or other things like that. What made you settle on those?
Because they are the foundation of good work and good business. And good business is about high performance, but it's about putting people first to support that. So I see in our organizations, Trevor, false dichotomies. It's either compliance or compassion, or it's accountability or empathy. And we create this right or wrong, or win or lose, or black or white, or it's, and we create these in oppositional positions, often reinforced by silo working and mistrust and breakdown in our organizations. And when I look through the processes of our workplace and the operating system of our workplace, it's binary and oppositional, it's either or. And the language of the future of work in our modern successful organization, it's not either or, it's and both. You can be compliant and compassionate. You can be tough and tender. You can be empathetic and hold people to account. So what the operating model does there, the people and culture operating model, is an and both model. So the people domain is about creating people-centered workplaces where our individuals can thrive and teams can flourish. So it's about how do we deliver performance conversations. It's about how do we create people-centered processes. It's about how do we recruit, attract, and retain the top talent in our organization. How do we create people-centered management, about giving feedback, listening, engaging, treating people as human beings. The culture is about how do we build these truly transformational cultures which are fair and just and inclusive and sustainable. And these are not a moral or ideological or ethical element to work. I'm not trying to be ideological. It's because those principles mean that people feel happier and healthier. And when you're happy and healthy, you perform better. So transformational culture is doing the right thing to drive performance. Strategy is about creating strategic alignment between the people priorities in our workplace and the corporate objectives, and creating a sense of common strategic focus and common purpose and alignment of strategy, where the chief people officer and the chief executive officer work together to drive the strategic focus within the organization, mobilizing the best of our people and our systems and our culture. Now, justice is the fourth domain. We subcontract justice to broken systems, managers who don't have the skills. And when that doesn't work, we bring in very expensive lawyers, or, as I said, in my case, slightly less expensive mediators. But you can't subcontract justice, because justice defines how we behave. Behavior defines the culture. So if we are subcontracting justice out, we're subcontracting culture out. But we can't subcontract culture because we own culture. So by bringing justice in as one of the five domains, but focusing not on retributive justice of blame and shame and punish and destroy, which is the justice paradigm which is prevalent in our workplaces, but transformative justice, which blends procedural justice, doing the process correctly, with restorative justice, repair harm, create spaces for dialogue, then justice becomes the key driver. And the fifth domain, the value domain, recognizes that there is a measurable, discernible outcome. But it's not just the profit message of shareholder value. There's stakeholder value. What's our impact on our stakeholders? There's social value and the social giving and the method that we have to support our communities and others. And there's strategic value. We create that strategic narrative to help us to grow as a business and deliver that return on investment to the PE backers and venture capitalists and the owners of the business. So those are the value measures that are helping to be reimagined as we start to see the people and culture focus. So those are the five domains.
Okay, and what is it? Impossible question this, but what is it in people and culture that leaders of organisations get wrong most often about?
Really, so there's probably a bit of a list. And again, when I interviewed 30 plus chief people officers for the books. There's some really great stories there about what they're doing to get it right. What I think I hear people getting wrong, the first one is accepting silos as a norm within our organization. If there's one tool I can put into the manager or leader's toolkit, is a hammer. Now, I am a big advocate of not having hammers in toolkits, because if every problem is a nail, then every person is kind of hit with a hammer. But taking a silo busting hammer out and removing those silos, because those silos are toxic. They reinforce power bases. They reinforce centralization of control. They underpin autocracy, command and control methodology. They break down collaboration across the system. They undermine creativity. They block innovation, and ultimately have a slow, sometimes a quicker, adverse impact on the business. So I think reducing silo working. Now that also allows us then to sort of rethink the concept of the hierarchy. How do we think about leadership through a more inclusive, transformational servant lens? So removing the silo, creating cross-functional activities, driving collaboration and co-creation, reimagining your role as a leader to serve and transform and create the vision and to empower others. One of the things I see in leadership that is wrong, but also I get excited when I see it right, Trevor, is when I see the leader not holding on to their leadership as a competitive advantage in this concept of the labour market that gives me an advantage in the hierarchy, but rather that their leadership becomes an egalitarian expression of effective work, and the role of the leader is to grow leadership in others, and that they share their leadership and distribute their leadership. So when I see that happening, and the concept of the role of the leader is to grow and engender leadership, this is a powerful reawakening of the idea of distribution.
Does it frustrate you then when you see a sort of media portrayal of leaders in organizations in the Apprentice, Alan Sugar, Donald Trump kind of mode? You're fired, the sort of culture of fear and humiliation. And, I mean, does that, to me, somebody who's doing this podcast on entrepreneurial things, that this idea, this concept of entrepreneur is completely outdated. I don't want to put words into your mouth, so you tell me when you see something like that, does that hinder the sort of messages that you're trying to get across?
I think it absolutely does. I mean, I've got some statistics here. I'm going to show them. So according to Gallup, only 23% of our employees feel engaged in the workplace. In the UK, it's even worse. And we have some of the lowest engagement levels in the G7. Burnouts reported by 44% of employees, according to Deloitte. UK productivity around 15 to 20% behind leading economies in the UK. Only 4 in 10 employees say they trust their employer, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer. £28 billion a year spent on conflicts a year, billion with a B, on conflict resolution. Now, I'm not going to suggest that the Apprentice show has had any impact on that, but this is not a coincidence. We're unhappy, we're disengaged, we're unproductive. It's an unhealthy working space, and yet the prevailing paradigm of leadership is autocratic command and control in the way that you've described. Do I get frustrated by it? Perhaps. Do I see it as a great opportunity to really shine a light on best practice? And do I meet the most incredible leaders every day who inspire me and show me what great leadership looks like? Yes. Am I on an absolute mission to tell their story and showcase their work? And I know you are too, Trevor. For sure I am. And I believe passionately in showcasing their stories. I love storytelling. I believe passionately in helping those leaders to tell their stories. I think we need a counter narrative. I think the narrative of autocracy and power and might is right. And, it's there, and people are feeling the unease. But what I'd be saying to all of us who are feeling the unease at the moment of watching the global conflagration and the conflict is that's how people feel every day in your offices when they're experiencing those power abuses and relationship breakdowns and conflicts in offices every day. So how you're feeling now when you watch the news at 10 and see another missile strike is exactly how people feel in the office. So what I'd be saying is, if you feel the fear and you feel the anxiety and you feel the harm and you feel helpless, you're not helpless. Recognizing that this is the felt experience of people in our organizations, people of color, people who are experiencing conflict, people who are experiencing challenge. And my advice is, if you feel helpless, address your helplessness by doing one really important thing. Go into your office tomorrow and ask people how they're feeling and give them a jolly good listening to, and utter these 4 immortal words to those people. I see you. I hear you. I understand you. I appreciate you. And when we utter those immortal words, you're no longer helpless. You have agency as a leader and a manager. But moreover, you give the people that you're listening to agency. And if we want to change the world, let's start with the climate in our team, one conversation at a time. You're not helpless. You have agency. We can change culture one conversation at a time. And that's the message I take into organizations. It's not a complex message. Sometimes maybe it's naive. Who knows? I've been called that, as I said before. Maybe it's optimistic. Maybe it's wildly ambitious. But it's also deeply human. And we're not helpless. We have agency. We also have two ears stuck on the side of our head, Trevor, and thank goodness they're there, because if we mobilize those tools and go and listen and hear and understand, we can change the world one conversation at a time, and we can provide that counter narrative. So if you're sat at home feeling helpless and worried and anxious, that's the opportunity. That's the call to action. This is that moment to do something differently.
Right. I mean, that's great stuff, that we have these little building blocks that are within our control, even if so much is not in our control. I just want to, we're getting towards the end of our time together now, but so I just want to ask you a sort of couple of questions that, we did a little pit stop in the early 2010s where you'd been developing the business and we were talking to you about your on the business experiences. These last dozen or so years have been a lot more, successful. You're doing all sorts of incredible work, number one consultant of the year, number one HR most influential thinker, so you're obviously doing lots of things right. What have you been like, though, as an entrepreneur? I noticed when we looked at you've set up, it's called TCM Group. You've sort of set up lots of little businesses, little things on the side. How has that changed you? How are you running your own kind of businesses, effectively? And have you just become a different type of entrepreneur in this second phase?
Yeah, it's a great. So I set up the business because what I was struggling to do, Trevor, was explain what I did under one roof of TCM. So I started to deconstruct it. I realized that at a time that getting onto Google was tough. So it became a bit of an SEO. It's driven by search engine optimization, really. So I wanted to be found. So I had a personal challenge. I like setting myself personal challenge. Go and write a book, go and launch a magazine, go and set up a conference business, go and set up a new company. So I set myself little challenges. So my challenge was to get number one, number two, and the snippet text on Google for all of my key search terms. Bit of an SEO geek. I love SEO. Of course, now I'm getting really into my AI. So how do I do this? So I went off and bought the highleveldomains.com.co.uk for the key search terms that I thought would be helping me to get onto Google. So I set up the mediation company to help people who are searching for a mediation company. So I set up the mediation company. I already had an investigations business. I was investigating complex and serious behaviours in some large organisations. So I did the same. I set up the investigationcompany.com.co.uk. So I thought, okay, so I've now got two key businesses in my ecosystem. I was already doing leadership development for a number of clients, and a lot of the skills I was taking that I've shared with you, I was taking into management and leadership. So I set up the Engage Leadership brand, got engageleadership.com, engageleadership.co.uk. And then aside to that, I set up a business called Engage Coaching, same principle. So my task now was to get into the SEO, number one, number two. Number three, I thought, okay, well, I'll write some books and do some articles. That helps to build the profile around it. So I introduced a whole layer of thought leadership. I set up an institute called the People and Culture Institute to bring in an evidence-based and data-driven approach to my thought leadership. I set up a magazine called The People Leader, which is going down really well, 300,000 distribution list on The People Leader, which is also an events platform. I set up another consultancy called People and Culture Global, again, same principles. So what I did is my ecosystem evolved from a disaggregation of the skills and capabilities that I bought, that then generated this incredibly powerful value proposition as a business consultancy supporting our clients to develop purpose-driven, values-based and people-centered workplaces. So I was constantly reimagining the value proposition that sat beneath this ecosystem, and the disaggregation of knowledge into a branding ecosystem underpinned by a really clear single value proposition. And what I've been able to do is grow the business. We're growing. We're not in hyper growth. I think that'd be an exaggeration, but we're in scale up growth, and we're scaling up. So I've been able to recruit some top talent into the business. I have Emma Jane, who's joined me recently as my head of marketing communications, who's really helping me now and helping all of us to develop the value proposition and the messaging. I've got a head of learning and development, Deb, who's helping me really to construct the work that we're doing around empowerment through our training and learning methods. And I have a head of business consultancy, Louise, who helps to then develop the internal sort of system and operating model. So I'm very close to my client success managers and my consultant partners, and very much, there's not hierarchy at the business, but I now have a leadership team who can support the growth, if you will, and helping me to distribute my leadership. And that allows me then to focus on my People Leader platform, which is the magazine and the events business.
Okay, so is the growth feeding the culture rather than eating the culture at the moment? Is that so? You're able to walk the talk, if you like.
I hope so. I test myself. As I said, I like to challenge myself. I challenge myself every day to be that leader. And I realize it's important that I do seek to walk the talk. I know how to give tough feedback, and sometimes I get it wrong, and I actively seek guidance and feedback. I know how to give praise and reward and support people. I learn from people around me. I'm constantly learning and developing my leadership, but I hold myself to a very high standard and seek to hold myself to a high standard because I talk about this stuff. But that isn't crippling or suffocating for me. I'm always learning and growing and developing and trying to foster a deeper understanding of myself and how I can lead. I also, although we're a small business, I have centres of excellence, and one of our centres of excellence is a people and culture centre of excellence. We have consultancy excellence, training excellence, so we have quality centres of excellence, as well as our own internal one. So we're reflecting in a very inclusive way about the cultural environment within the company. So it's not navel gazing, it's just checking in. How are we doing? How are people feeling? How's this working? Are we showing up in the way that we need to as leaders? So it's and I get it wrong. I misstep. I'm a human being, things go wrong, but I do hold myself to a high standard. And it's right that I do. But not so much so, as I said, it renders me, scared to say or act, really.
Okay, so it's now 2026. I can't help but notice, but 2001 is 25 years ago. So quarter of a century. Are you putting up the bunting? Are you are you celebrating in some way? But most of all, for the benefit of our listeners, you've got a lot of things to pass on. But if I was asking you to just pick out one or two things that would give our listeners, those who are thinking about starting businesses or have just started businesses, the confidence that they need to succeed, what guidance would you offer them?
Amazing. So 25 years, we are doing a big celebration. We have our design team at the moment working up a nice logo. So it's on June the 11th, our 25th anniversary. We'll at least have a birthday cake and a sing-song. But I think we'll probably get a couple of glasses of fizz and go out for a nice meal. But yeah, so expect to see some exciting stuff coming out of TCM to celebrate that. What have I learned in the 25 years that I could maybe pass on? I'll think about it from two perspectives. One is a personal perspective of what I've learned, and also a piece of advice that I might give as you're growing and scaling your own exciting enterprise and just thinking about the incredible impact that you're going to have on the world. So what have I learned? And and I know you might have heard this, Trevor, and it might be a bit cliche, so forgive me for it sounding cliche, but believe in yourself. You have to believe in yourself. That dream, that idea, that passion, that thing that gets you out of bed and you find yourself leaping out of bed when others are barely able to crawl out of bed. Believe in it, and people will knock you for various reasons, good, bad, or indifferent. And if you listen to the voices in your head or listen to their voices, that can really start to have a very adverse impact on you. Believe in yourself, that thing that you believe in, it's right. Make it happen and keep going, keep pushing, keep driving. And those moments of, you might be experiencing it right now, today, you might be thinking, how am I going to pay my bills this Friday? Or what issues am I going to have this week? Or how do I deal with this particular issue? And it might not feel like it when you're in that moment and you didn't sleep the night before and it's having a stressful impact on you. But those moments, you will grow through them. You will come through the other side of them. And you might have a scar and a bruise along the way, but that makes you who you are. And I think have that confidence, work through those, and stay true to yourself would be my best. That's my learning for me, if I can pass that on. And the other piece of learning is that I pass on from the sort of work I've done in business consultancy, and mega massive business. I work across global blue chips, right the way through to micro businesses, startups, small charities. And the piece of advice I would say, whatever you do, don't go in and put in, and this might sound really granular, you might be surprised to hear me say it, but don't put in a grievance procedure in your organization. It's a canker, and you don't realize what harm it's doing. There's no legal, moral, statutory duty on organizations to have this horrible process. So when you're thinking about scaling up and growing up, you have to ask yourself, how will we resolve disagreement? And as an entrepreneur, there are things that are valuable to you, they're valuable to me. Insight, learning, creativity, and growth. Ask yourself, when people disagree, how will you unlock those 4 things? Because they are the currency of your business. I know the balance sheet's the currency of the business, and I know cash is king and all that. But those 4 elements of the currency. So when people disagree, as surely they will, how will you unlock that currency? And I can tell you for a cast iron fact, I mean, if you don't believe me, go and introduce it and find out yourself. But I can tell you for a cast iron fact, that grievance and disciplinary procedure will not unlock the currency that you need as an entrepreneur to grow your business. So be very, very wary about walking into the minefield of policies and procedures. Just a note of caution. That's all I would offer.
And that's where we left our interview with David Liddle. There's a real quality and depth to this conversation that shines through for me. And what stayed with me most was near the end there. Believe in yourself. Lots of people say things like that, but after an hour with David, I really did. I found him inspiring to talk to, and I hope you did too. And then there's his belief in those organisations that let people feel heard, valued and treated fairly. Not as some sort of fluffy ideal, but as something that has had a direct impact on performance, trust and long-term success. Now, I was struck by how David reframes conflict as well, not as something to be avoided or pushed into a process, but as something that, handled well, can actually unlock insight, learning and growth. And I also thought the way he ended was especially telling. For all the big thinking around people, culture and leadership, he finished with something very practical, a warning for founders. Be careful what you build into your business as it grows, he was saying. The systems you introduce may look sensible on paper, but they can quietly work against the very qualities that make your business prosper. So, thank you to David, thank you to all of our listeners, and for the great feedback we're getting on the show. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate and review through your usual podcast provider. And if you want to find out more about the Merri-Cast, look for me, Trevor Meriden, or our business Merriborn at merriborn.co.uk. And until next time, thanks for listening.